What if I told you that a player scoring 30 points might actually be the primary reason their team lost the game?
I mean, it sounds completely counterintuitive, right?
Right. But for decades, the traditional basketball box score has essentially been lying to us. Well, lying by omission anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
We look at the rebounds, we tally the assists, we look at the shooting percentages, and, we assume we have this complete understanding of what just happened on the court.
Right, but we really don't.
Exactly. Reading a traditional box score is kind of like trying to critique a legendary film director's camera angles when you've only ever seen the movie poster.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Right. You know who the main characters are, but you are completely blind to the actual geometry of the narrative.
And that is a massive blind spot in sports analysis today. I mean, the box score provides this clean binary summary of outcomes, but it completely strips away the entire physical context.
The context of how those outcomes were actually generated.
Exactly, because we're dealing with a dynamic, constantly shifting landscape of human movement, It operates on this foundation of highly complex spatial interactions.
And that invisible landscape is exactly what we're wading into today. So, welcome to this deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today, we are taking you into the invisible geometry of basketball, and we're being guided by a genuinely groundbreaking piece of academic research.
It really is a fantastic paper.
Yeah, it is. We are exploring a systematic review titled Beyond Traditional Metrics, a systematic review of spatial and spatiotemporal indicators in 5-on-5 basketball.
Quite a mouthful, but very precise.
Very. And this was authored by Yanlu Lu, Wenlong Zhang, Mingquan Zhang, Qi Su, and Zhao Xu. They're from the College of Physical Education at Dalian University in China.
Right.
And it was published in the Journal of Sports Science and Medicine in 2026.
And, the authors have just done a remarkable job synthesizing where the frontier of sports science currently sits right now.
Yeah, they sifted through years of data, right?
Exactly. They isolated how court reference tracking technology completely transforms our understanding of team tactics. We are no longer just asking if a play worked.
Right.
We are asking what precise spatial conditions allowed it to work in the first place.
And so our mission today is to understand that evolution. We are moving from simply counting what happens, the traditional events, to scientifically mapping how and where those actions unfold in space and time.
Which is a huge leap.
It's massive. When I was reading this study, it completely broke my brain in the best way possible. It treats a basketball court less like a physical gym and much more like a high-level physics simulation.
Yeah, that's exactly what it becomes.
But to truly appreciate this high-dimensional data, we first have to, establish why we need to move beyond those traditional metrics to begin with.
Right, because traditional event-based statistics, things like total turnovers or efficiency ratios like field goal percentages, they are inherently outcome-based.
Meaning they just tell us the final result of the sequence.
Exactly. And, while they hold undeniable utility for, say, a general manager who is evaluating broad roster strength.
Sure, over a season.
Yeah, but they offer remarkably limited insight to a coach trying to diagnose the granular processes that generated those outcomes. A successful shot just doesn't tell the whole story.
Okay, let me push back on that a little bit, though.
Sure, go ahead.
Because if we look at defensive efficiency over a long timeline, doesn't the spatial data become a bit of overkill?
How do you mean?
Well, say a team consistently holds opponents to 35% shooting from the floor over an entire 82-game season.
Right.
The math is the math.
Yeah.
Over that massive sample size, the luck averages out, right? Doesn't that objectively prove their defensive scheme is tactically effective without needing to, map out the millimeter movements of every single player?
Over an 82-game sample, it proves they have a highly effective roster and a generally sound system, yes.
Okay, so why do we need the extra data?
Because averages are a luxury of the regular season. They don't help you on a Tuesday night in Game 7 of the playoffs.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Right. Especially when you are playing a specific opponent who has figured out how to exploit one specific rotation in your pick-and-roll defense.
So you need the micro level.
Exactly. Let's look at a made basket from that micro level. That exact same outcome, 2 points on the scoreboard, could be the result of a beautifully organized possession.
Like one that systematically displaced the defense using space, timing, and passing.
Yes. Or it could be a panicked, heavily contested, off-balance heave with 0.1 seconds left on the shot clock that just happened to bank in.
But the box score treats both of those as mathematically identical events. a made field goal.
Right. And the same goes for a pass. A completed pass might perfectly maintain an offensive advantage, breaking the defensive line and forcing a rotation.
Which is good.
Very good. Or it might be a desperation dump-off to a teammate in a much worse position just to release defensive pressure because, well, the primary tactical option was entirely suffocated.
So the box score tells you the event occurred, but spatial data tells you if the players actually utilized court space, timing, and teammate-opponent relations to create a genuine advantage.
You nailed it. That's the difference.
So if the box score is functionally dead for high-level tactical analysis, how do researchers actually measure the invisible? Because you can't just put a tape measure on the court during a live game.
No, you can't. And this is where the systematic review gets really fascinating.
Yeah, because instead of just listing out a bunch of random new stats, the authors categorize the tracking data into different analytical levels.
Out of, I think it was 759 records, they rigorously selected 16 studies that met the criteria for standard 5-on-5 basketball.
Right. And I like to think of their categories as a camera lens that starts incredibly tight on the action and then slowly zooms out to reveal the bigger picture.
That is the ideal framework for understanding this, honestly, because if we start with the tightest shot, we are looking at what they call the local or individual level. This is the immediate spatial condition of a single action, isolated in space.
So we're talking about the specific coordinates of a shot location or the trajectory factors of the ball itself.
Exactly.
But the study also mentions things like contest pressure at this level. How are researchers mathematically defining contest pressure beyond just noting that, a defender was standing nearby?
Well, it requires calculating a pretty complex intersection of variables. You aren't just looking at the static distance between the shooter and the defender.
Right, because everyone is moving.
Exactly. You are calculating the closing velocity of the defender relative to the exact release point of the shooter's hands.
Okay, so if a defender is 5 feet away but moving away from the shooter?
The contest pressure is virtually zero.
Wow. But if they're closing in?
Right. If the defender is 5 feet away but closing at an absolute sprint with an extended wingspan, the algorithm calculates a high contest pressure.
By projecting the intersection of the defender's hand and the ball's trajectory arc, right?
Yes. It's mapping that potential collision point.
That immediately makes traditional stats look so primitive.
Doesn't it?
Yeah. Okay, so we've looked at the ball and the immediate local space. Now, let's zoom the camera out a bit to what they call the interactional level.
Right, moving from the individual to the dynamic between players.
Yeah, now we're measuring how players relate in space and time. And the study highlights something called dyadic coupling.
Dyadic coupling, yes.
Imagine an invisible string tied between a point guard and their primary defender. Dyadic coupling feels like it's measuring the tension on that string. Who initiates the movement, who reacts, and the microsecond delay between the two.
The concept of tension is crucial there, because dyadic coupling specifically measures relative phase and spatial synchronization.
Okay, so what does that look like on the court?
Well, when an offensive player initiates a drive to the left, how many milliseconds does it take for the defender's center of mass to mirror that lateral movement?
Got it. And if they are perfectly coupled, the distance between them remains relatively static, and the defense holds.
Exactly. But if the offensive player employs, say, a hesitation dribble, they might completely disrupt that synchronization.
The defender bites on the fake.
Right. And that microsecond delay in the defender's reaction creates a sudden spike in the distance between them.
The string snaps, so to speak.
Exactly. The coupling breaks, and an offensive advantage is officially created in the spatial data.
So it's quantifying the exact moment a player's ankles get broken, mathematically.
In a sense, yeah. It's analyzing the one-on-one battle not by who scored, but by who maintains spatial dominance throughout the sequence.
And this applies off the ball too, right?
Absolutely. You can measure the dyadic coupling between a passer and a receiver moving through a screen to determine if their timing is perfectly optimal.
Okay, let's unpack this because we need to zoom the camera out even further. We move from the one-on-one battle to the collective level.
Now we're looking at the macro team organization.
Right. Tracking all 5 offensive players and all 5 defensive players simultaneously. And the metrics here start sounding like architecture team, spatial center, court area occupation, and something called the stretch index.
The stretch index is a major one.
So is a metric like the stretch index essentially treating the offense and the defense like giant competing rubber bands, measuring precisely how much the offensive spacing can force the defensive structure to expand, before it snaps back to protect the paint.
What's fascinating here is that the expansion and contraction of that defensive structure is exactly what collector indicators track.
So the rubber band analogy holds up.
It's perfect. A highly efficient offense wants to stretch that defensive rubber band as wide as possible to create gaps.
While the defense wants to stay compact, protecting those high-value areas near the basket while still covering the perimeter.
Precisely. And the stretch index measures the mean distance of all players from the spatial center of the team.
And this highlights something really interesting in the methodology of this review. The authors were incredibly strict about only including studies that analyzed standard regulation 5-on-5 basketball.
They were very firm on that.
They explicitly threw out tracking data from 3-on-3 games or small-sided practice drills. And at first I wondered why. I mean, basketball is basketball, right?
You'd think so, but no.
Right. But if we use the rubber band analogy, a 3-on-3 game on a full or half court completely alters the underlying physics of that tension.
Exactly. You cannot study the physics of a specific rubber band by cutting 2/5 of the material away and expecting it to behave the exact same way.
It's just a different object at that point.
Yeah. Spatial geometry in basketball scales nonlinearly. The dimensions of the court, relative to the number of bodies occupying it, dictate the spatial pressure.
So in a 3-on-3 game, there is significantly more open space per player.
Way more. The tension on the stretch index is entirely different. The interactions, the continuous reorganization of the defense, the help side rotations, all of those complex processes operating at multiple analytical levels are completely unique to standard 5-on-5 match play.
So measuring the stretch index in a modified practice drill gives you data on the drill, but it tells you almost nothing about the tactical reality of actual regulation basketball.
Right. It's essentially junk data for a 5-on-5 coach.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
The environment dictates the geometry.
And we also have to factor in the defensive impact level, which the authors categorized as its own tier.
Oh, right, because it's not just about spacing, it's about how the defense actively degrades the offense's efficiency.
Exactly. This tier looks at how defensive formations influence shot efficiency across different zones. It's measuring the actual aggregate impact of that contest pressure we talked about earlier, but across the entire system.
Okay, let's unpack this even further, because there's one final zoom level. Level 5 is where we bring in the supercomputers.
Yes, the model-derived or complexity indicators.
Because we have these advanced optical trapping systems, cameras in the rafters capturing the coordinates of all 10 players and the ball 25 times a second.
It's a massive amount of data.
It really is. And researchers can use it to build algorithms that summarize massive abstract spatial concepts. One of the big ones mentioned is expected possession value, or EPV.
EPV is arguably the holy grail of modern basketball analytics.
How so?
Well, instead of waiting for a shot to be taken to evaluate the possession, EPV evaluates the mathematical point value of a possession at any given microsecond.
Based on the spatial configuration of all 10 players on the court at that exact moment.
Yes.
So it's like a live stock market ticker for the possession.
That is a great analogy.
Let's trace how that actually works in a game. Say the point guard calls for a pick and roll at the top of the key. Before the screen is even set, the EPV might sit at, say, 0.9 point.
Right, a baseline value.
Yeah. But as the point guard uses the screen and beats their man off the dribble, penetrating into the paint, the algorithm instantly recognizes the spatial advantage. So the EPV ticker spikes to 1.2.
But then the weak side defender steps up to stop the drive.
Right. And suddenly, the passing lane to the corner shooter is obscured by the defender's wingspan.
So the spatial data registers that the original advantage has been neutralized.
And the EPV ticker immediately drops back down to 0.85.
Exactly. And the power of this is that it allows coaches to evaluate the decision-making process frame by frame.
They can just pause the film.
Yeah, they point to a specific half-second window on the video and say, right here, when the defense collapsed, the EPV of this possession peaked. You didn't make the pass, you held the ball, the window closed, and the possession lost value.
It shifts the evaluation from the final result to the actual process of advantage creation.
Exactly. It's evaluating the decision, not just the outcome.
That is incredible. And then you have concepts at this model-derived level like player gravity.
Oh, player gravity is fascinating.
It sounds like sci-fi, but it is a very real mathematical representation of fear.
That's a very dramatic way to put it, but it's accurate.
Right. Because player gravity measures how much a specific offensive player distorts the defensive structure just by standing in a certain spot on the floor.
Think about a Steph Curry archetype.
Exactly. A player whose shooting ability is so lethal that the defense is physically tethered to him even when he's 30 feet from the hoop.
You are literally measuring the invisible influence a human being exerts on other human beings.
A high-gravity player alters the geometry of the paint for their teammates, even if they never touch the ball during the entire possession.
And the tracking cameras quantify this by measuring how far a defender is willing to stray from that shooter to provide help defense.
If the defender refuses to leave the shooter side, that opens up a driving lane for someone else.
Yep. And traditional box scores give the shooter 0 credit for that play. But spatial tracking data credits the shooter's gravity for fundamentally creating the structural weakness in the defense.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because if we have all these incredible high-dimensional measurements, if we can track the exact tension of dyadic coupling, calculate the closing speed of contest pressure, and, monitor the stock ticker of expected possession value.
We have a lot of data.
Tons. So the natural assumption is that we can now perfectly map out tactical genius. We have the exact coordinates of every movement, therefore we have definitively captured the player's intent.
You would think so, but the systematic review issues a massive flashing warning sign right here.
Yeah, they really pump the brakes.
It is the single most important caveat in the entire field of spatial tracking. The researchers emphasize that spatial and spatiotemporal indicators describe observable behavioral patterns, but they do absolutely not directly measure tactical intent.
Or tactical effectiveness in a vacuum.
Exactly.
It reminds me of crime scene forensics.
How
Well, imagine looking at a weird set of footprints in the mud. You bring in the lasers and the tracking cameras, and you scientifically determine, with millimeter precision, the exact stride length, the pivot angle, and the velocity of the movement.
Okay.
You feed it all into a model and determine the person was performing a complex, mathematically brilliant dance routine.
But in reality...
In reality, they just tripped over a rock and stumbled.
Oh, that's great.
Right. The spatial data of the footprint is perfectly accurate. The physics are correct. But the tactical intent we assign to it might be completely, hilariously wrong.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you can have the most precise data in the world, but if you strip away the situational context, the data will lie to you.
It's just a stumble.
Exactly. The authors of the review refer to this as the necessity of the possession context.
Possession content.
Yes. Progress in basketball analytics won't come from just inventing more complex algorithms to measure distance and speed. It comes from ensuring those metrics are constantly anchored to the reality of the game state.
So what does possession context actually look like when interpreting the data? Like, give me an example.
Well, you cannot interpret a collective indicator, like the stretch index we talked about, without understanding the phase of play.
Okay, because a fast break is different from a half-court set.
Completely different. The spatial geometry of a fast break looks entirely different than the spatial geometry of a half-court set against a set defense. And more importantly, you have to account for shot clock pressure.
Oh, right.
Let's say a player takes a highly contested shot from a mathematically low-efficiency spatial zone on the floor.
Right, so the EPV ticker plummets, and the algorithm flags it as a terrible tactical decision, a bad shot.
But if you feed the possession context into the analysis and realize there were only 2 seconds left on the shot clock when the player received the ball.
The interpretation completely flips.
Yes. Under that specific pressure, literally any shot that hits the rim is tactically superior to holding the ball and taking a shot clock violation.
Because a turnover is a guaranteed 0 points.
Exactly. The spatial data, the low efficiency zone, the high contest pressure only becomes tactically meaningful when it is layered over the situational reality of the possession.
So location-based analysis represents tactical behavior. It is not direct evidence of tactical effectiveness on its own.
Spot on.
So despite all the cameras and the supercomputers processing millions of data points, the data still fiercely requires the human element.
It absolutely does.
The machine can measure the rubber band stretching to the exact millimeter, but a human coach has to understand why the players were forced to pull it in that exact moment.
The central challenge for sports science moving forward is no longer whether we can describe basketball behavior.
Because we can.
We have the technology to describe it flawlessly. The challenge now is the extent to which we can justify credible inferences about tactical performance from that description.
It's all about inference.
Every single data point must be interpreted through the lens of the shot clock, the defender proximity, and whether the movement was part of an isolated play or, a chaotic, unfolding sequence of transitions.
So what does this all mean for you?
It means the game is more complex than we ever thought.
It really is. Over this deep dive, we've traveled from the flat, two-dimensional world of traditional box scores, where rebounds and points exist in an isolated vacuum, into the dynamic, high-dimensional geometry of spatial tracking.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We've seen how researchers are using cameras to calculate the velocity of defensive closeouts, measure the invisible string of dyadic coupling between a ball handler and a defender, and track the expansion of the team's spatial rubber band.
And we looked at the supercomputer.
Right. We've seen how they calculate the expected possession value millisecond by millisecond, quantifying the gravitational pull of a single shooter on the perimeter.
But most importantly, we've learned that all of this brilliant math still requires deep human context to mean anything at all.
Exactly. You can map the footprint perfectly, but you still need to know if the player was dancing or tripping.
And this systematic review is just a phenomenal synthesis of where the industry is heading.
It really perfectly balances the enthusiasm for big data with the necessary academic rigor of demanding contextual analysis.
Because the game is chaotic, and the math just helps us see the patterns within that chaos.
It really does feel like seeing the Matrix for the first time, honestly.
It does.
If you want to fully grasp these fascinating analytical frameworks and see how the researchers categorize all these different tracking metrics, I highly encourage you to read the full article yourself.
It is definitely worth the read.
Again, you can find the study, Beyond Traditional Metrics, a systematic review of spatial and spatiotemporal indicators in 5-on-5 basketball, and that's published in the Journal of Sports Science and Medicine.
Go check it out.
And also, please take a second right now to follow this channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss our future deep dives into similar cutting-edge academic content.
Because the tools we have to understand human movement are only going to get more advanced from here.
Absolutely. And that leads me to a final thought I want to leave you with today.
Okay, let's hear it.
Well, we talked about how algorithms can now model player gravity and map human spatial dynamics down to the millimeter in real time, right?
Yeah.
So if the tracking data keeps getting better and the predictive models keep getting smarter, how long is it until defensive schemes aren't drawn up by human coaches on whiteboards at all?
Oh, wow.
Imagine a near future where defensive rotations are generated continuously by AI algorithms, instantly calculating the optimal spatial geometry to counter an opponent's stretch index, and whispering those micro-adjustments directly into players' earpieces on the fly.
That's a wild thought.
If the math of the invisible geometry becomes truly predictively perfect, does the game lose its art?
Or does the art just become something else entirely?
Exactly. We might finally get a perfectly clear, high-resolution picture of the game's anatomy, but we still have to figure out what gives it a pulse. Think about that next time you watch a game.